from 1990, when it was below the others, and as you can see, has now risen to the top in 2014. That red line at the end is GDP growth in the Philippines. FDI is a topic of great interest to the Joint Foreign Chambers, and it should be to all Filipinos. And it has suddenly gone up, in contrast to the headline in Business World today, which says it's gone down 34%. That's registrations, and I think it suspects it is the absence of $1 billion power plant or one single project in there. But we'll hear that later when Yusek Manalo is in our panel after lunch. And if this were updated, the figures are not available for FDI for 2014, you would see the red line of the Philippines at $6 billion and approaching Thailand and a bit under Malaysia and Vietnam. It is definitely on the way up. It still has a long way to go. I don't want to dwell on the details of this. It's been published. In the assessment, there are 15 international rankings that we follow, but not in as much detail as the speaker who will follow in two presentations, Bill Luce. But we do have a little chart. We rate them all, and you can see the red going down from 2008 and 2009 to almost no red in 2013. There's a very gross look at 15 of the ratings, whether they were neutral, improving, or not. But the negative part of this has been declining, and the green has been going up, and Bill Luce will give us more details. Very quickly on part three, part two was about competitiveness. Part three gets you into the 7 big winner sectors, and what I've done here is the ones in green, the ones in red, is a measure of progress on implementation of the recommendations that are in Arangkada. Green means they're moving at above the average of the total presentations. Red means they're not moving as fast. Doesn't mean they're moving backwards. And recommendations are, in many cases, never implemented. They take a generation or two. Some are easy and are implemented. Others, like having a decent rail structure, take a long time. This is the general business environment. We like to say that if you improve on these areas, you are nurturing the 7 big winner sectors. But you really have to read the assessment to get into this level of detail. There's a lot of good information into it. Nobody reads it all except me, and I would encourage you to dip in here and there, depending on your interest. Now, this slide shows all of the recommendations counted up. And last year, it was 73% of the total that were active. Active means it's started, substantial progress, or implemented. And dormant, or not active, means they have not started or there's been backward regression. So basically, this year is about the same. About 3/4 of the total are active. And I think to the business community, that's very good news, but not good enough. There's always more work to be done. I got 2 more slides. One shows you a sample of a section or a part. In this case, it's seaports, and this is an area that, while it has 20 recommendations, only half are moving. The others are dormant. So that would indicate that it needs attention, and there's no surprise if you know what the issues are with the seaports in the country. And a sample recommendation on page 71 of something that was advocated in a roundtable on tourism about the CIQ issue at the airports. So it was advocated in 2010, and progress in 2011, substantial progress in 2012, almost there, and then completed when the President gave a directive that at all airports in the Philippine government would pay overtime for CIQ. Because before that, well, I won't go into it, but there were rather extortion activities, very high charges to the airlines, which made our tourism industry less competitive. So I'm going to go down here in a moment after I introduce our next speaker, who is a very distinguished gentleman, who's the chairman of the Makati Business Club and a ceaseless advocate for reform in the Philippines, who has served in government in the Ramos administration as finance secretary and is a successful businessman who's been in finance and running a group of companies called FINMA, which most interestingly is also in education as well as many other activities. Our friend and the leader of the Makati Business Club, Ramon de Rosario, to talk about the priority measures of the business community.
National Treasurer Bobby Tan, Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, my colleagues in the Joint Foreign Chambers and Philippine Business Groups, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to everyone. First of all, let me thank you for the great honor of being invited to address you at this, the 4th anniversary forum of Arangkada Philippines. Arangkada, of course, is an excellent venue for constructive dialogue, where the private sector speaks with a unified voice on specific ways by which the Philippines can further accelerate its progress, while government has the opportunity to update the business community on the tangible measures it seeks to implement towards sustained and inclusive growth. The Aquino administration is now entering the home stretch of its term. There are now only 16 months remaining to institutionalize the much-needed and long overdue reforms that will ensure that the considerable gains of the last 4.5 years will not be reversed. After all, the President himself stated in his inaugural address that he wants strong institutions to be the legacy of his term. And this is a goal that the business community wholeheartedly supports. To give credit where credit is due, the Aquino administration, of course, deserves high marks for its excellent handling of our economic fundamentals. Congratulations indeed to Secretary Purisima and the other members of the Economic Development Cluster for laying rock-solid foundations for our economy, even in the face of numerous natural and man-made calamities we have had to face. The Aquino administration also deserves much credit for its transparency initiatives, as we recognize the contributions that Open Data Philippines, the Budget and Customs ng Bayan web portals, and the visible online presence of the Official Gazette, among others, bring to our good governance agenda and to the development of a culture of greater transparency and accountability. In international relations, the Aquino administration likewise deserves credit for the very principled position it has taken of insisting on resolving our maritime disputes through the rule of law, which has gained the country unprecedented admiration and respect in the community of nations. Of course, this is in addition to the excellent work being done in economic diplomacy, especially with our country's hosting of APEC this year. The government can certainly count on the private sector's support as we prepare for the APEC Economic Leaders meeting later this year. Clearly, we are in a much better shape today than we have been for the last 16 years. And with the growth momentum of the last 3 years, including the strong growth of the entire 2014, most especially the vigorous growth of the 4th quarter, we look forward to a very dynamic 2015. Then, 37 days ago, came Mama Sapano, and with it, questions on whether this unfortunate tragedy would threaten to reverse all that we have achieved this past 4.5 years, and possibly usher the country into another long period of lost opportunities and unrealized potential. It was in this context that many of us in the business community issued a statement calling for sobriety, courage, and unity. The statement appropriately expressed the business community's utmost respect and sympathies for the families of the gallant policemen of the Philippine National Police Special Action Force, and also expressed our sympathies to the families of our brother Muslim Filipinos and the innocent civilians who perished in that tragic encounter. But we noted too that in the midst of our collective grief, certain groups and individuals have called for an all-out war in Mindanao, carelessly branded our fellow Muslim Filipinos as terrorists, cast doubt on the Bangsamoro peace process and the sincerity of our negotiators, and vigorously demanded the resignation of our president. We lamented that such brinkmanship tactics have put at risk the entire peace process, which the government and our local and international partners have painstakingly worked on for decades, and the laudable milestones that the country has achieved since 2010. Thus, we declared that we do not and will not support calls for an all-out war and for the resignation of President Aquino, as we declared our continuing support for the Bangsamoro peace process. As we further said in our statement, political manipulation must not be allowed to take advantage of legitimate emotion and grief to the point that reason will be discarded and all the gains we have made will be undone. Rather, we appealed for sobriety, courage, and unity as we channel our energies towards reconciliation and a genuine search for truth and justice. In reiterating our support for the Bangsamoro peace process, we said that there is no other alternative to guarantee the aspirations of the Bangsamoro people but total and lasting peace. And the passage of the Bangsamoro Basic Law is a crucial component in the overall strategy for peace in Mindanao. We therefore appeal to the Aquino administration and all parties involved to put the peace process back on track at the earliest time possible. To achieve this, the complete facts surrounding the Mama Sapano incident must still be satisfactorily established and the demands of justice must be served. Thus, we call on the Philippine National Police Board of Inquiry, the Armed Forces, the MILF, the Department of Justice, and Congress to complete their investigations at the soonest time possible and render the reports to the nation. But as these inquiries are unlikely to fully satisfy the public, we believe it is likely that President Aquino, as our Commander-in-Chief, will have no other recourse but to himself give the Filipino people a full accounting of the incident that lets all the chips fall where they may. Indeed, only with a full and satisfactory accounting will our common pursuit of justice be possible. And only when justice is satisfied can the peace process move forward in an atmosphere, once again, of trust and confidence. While I fully support putting the peace process back on track as early as possible, with the hope of still passing the Bangsamoro Basic Law and implementing the required referendum within the next 16 months, I somewhat share the pessimism of many that the prevailing environment and the shortage of time may no longer allow all of this to be done. But I certainly do not see this as an argument to give up on peace in Mindanao. I see this as another reason to be very discriminating about our choice of leader in 2016. Getting the Bangsamoro peace process back on track early is also critical in order that we as a nation can maintain the forward momentum we have gained over the past 56 months. We have much work ahead, not only to institutionalize our gains, but also to fully realize the vast potentials that are now within our reach. The public and private sectors must come together to place the country on a continuous path towards progress and development. And this requires an assertive effort to focus on unfinished but certainly critical priorities. Let us review some of our key legislative priorities. If we truly wish to institutionalize the gains of the last 56 months, particularly in terms of transparency and accountability, chief among these priorities is the Freedom of Information Bill, which I continue to hope will finally pass in the House of Representatives this year, as promised by no less than Speaker Belmonte. I earlier mentioned some of the government's transparency initiatives. However, we strongly support the FOI bill as it will institutionalize the culture of transparency and accountability that President Aquino has initiated. The first FOI bill was filed all the way back in 1987 in compliance with the Constitution. 28 years is certainly too long a time for a constitutional mandate and a basic right to remain unrealized. The FOI bill must be passed so that our noteworthy good governance gains will be largely irreversible and sustained in subsequent administrations. Next, again, in terms of key legislative initiatives, I would like to strongly reiterate our call to amend the restrictive economic provisions of the Constitution as embodied in Resolution of both Houses number 1 by Speaker Feliciano Belmonte. This amendment, as you know, will give Congress the flexibility to determine which areas of the economy should be open to increased foreign participation based on thorough deliberations from the committee level to the plenary. The Philippines is among very few nations with specific economic restrictions lodged in our Constitution, whereas a large number of countries subscribe to the principle of allowing their legislatures to determine economic policy. There is no better time than now to accelerate the process of opening up our economy as we host the annual meeting of APEC, which champions policies of open markets and enhanced investments and trade among its member economies. We also believe that engaging in economic charter change will be beneficial for the medium and long term, especially in this period of ASEAN integration and the improved attractiveness of the Philippines as an investment destination. Significantly, greater openness in certain sectors is a prerequisite to joining high-level agreements, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Research by Dr. Cesar Corraraton of the Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University said that Philippine exports are seen to rise very significantly with TPP membership. Also consider that since a good number of our major trading partners, such as the United States, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam, are part of the TPP, we definitely cannot afford to be left out of this agreement and face severe handicaps in future trade with these countries. I would also like to add my support to well-publicized initiatives from business for the creation of a Department of Information and Communications Technology, which will give appropriate focus and support to a sector that should continue to experience dynamic growth. Critical also to maintain our growth momentum is a well-crafted competition law to promote a level playing field in our country and further improve our investment climate. Finally, we fully support the passage of the amendments to the Build, Operate, Transfer Act, which will institutionalize the PPP Center and its various mechanisms and further strengthen the present processes in big-ticket project procurement. There are, of course, many other legislative initiatives that we continue to support, but I highlighted the ones that I think will contribute significantly to sustaining the gains of the past 4.5 years. Allow me to move to the judiciary. The Maguindanao massacre case, as we know, has been ongoing now for more than 5 years. I think this case is important in terms of maintaining our people's faith in our justice system, because if a crime as blatant as this is not successfully prosecuted and the perpetrators put to jail, how can we trust our judicial system? With this important trial proceeding at a sluggish pace, sometimes questions arise as to whether the government is exerting everything in its power to ensure a speedy and fair resolution. While this complicated case involves powerful individuals with significant resources at their disposal, there are actionable steps that can be done to expedite the cases. For instance, a prominent law dean suggested that the cases against the Ampatuans themselves be separated and prioritized so that these can be resolved more expeditiously. Access to assets and outside communications of the accused also need to be severely curtailed to prevent any further intimidation or even elimination of witnesses. Certainly, innovative methods of legally and ethically speeding up the resolution of this case, as well as of the cases against former President Arroyo and the senators accused in the Napoles pork barrel scam, can be formulated. In these cases, the defense strategy to delay the proceedings in anticipation of a probably friendlier administration in 2016 is clear. We implore government to urgently bring all of these, if possible, to a quick resolution. Moving now to the executive branch, the most critical priority area, I believe, is accelerating infrastructure development. Since 2010, we have seen the public-private partnership program steadily gain steam, with about 50 or more projects of varying sizes in the pipeline due for implementation. By simple observation alone, the country faces a massive infrastructure gap. These mass transportation projects, expressways, seaports, and airports must be rapidly constructed with little or no blockages present. We are nevertheless aware that the awarding of a contract does not guarantee its full and immediate implementation. Another set of challenges emerge after the bidding process, which include right-of-way acquisition, imposition of temporary restraining orders by overly active courts, and appeals by losing bidders, which are entertained by government. The effective remedy to such concerns is to strengthen our PPP and procurement framework through further refinements of the processes of the various implementing agencies and the amendment of the BOT law, as earlier mentioned. Stability in policy is also important in ensuring adequate electricity supply and price competitiveness. We maintain our position that opening up the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, or EPIRA, to amendments will result in regulatory uncertainty that may cause the deferment or cancellation of power sector investments. EPIRA aims to privatize the power industry, foster greater competition, and bring down power prices. The first goal has been achieved, but the critical bridge between the first and the third goal is still missing. Thus, what is needed to solve our energy supply and pricing woes is the full and proper implementation of EPIRA. Besides this, investments in more baseload and peaking plants must be encouraged by formulating a clear energy security and price competitiveness roadmap with specific targets and timelines. The business community is still looking for such a genuine roadmap. Just as an aside, you may be aware that we may be facing a potential gap in power supply over the next few months. There is a continuing drive for more participants in what is called the Interruptible Load Program being implemented by Meralco as well as the Retail Electricity Suppliers Association. I encourage corporations with substantial self-generating facilities, if you haven't done so yet, to please sign up in this program, as well as for government to support this with a well-designed and highly practical energy conservation program. I believe the Department of Energy has already started a communications campaign on these energy conservation tips, and I hope that this will continue and gain more traction in the weeks to come. In terms of other critical job-generating sectors, we note that agriculture continues to perform below its potential. A third of our workforce is employed in agriculture. Therefore, it is imperative that roadmaps for specific agriculture subsectors be formulated and immediately implemented. Possible models to follow are the roadmaps of DTI for certain manufacturing industries. In addition, these roadmaps must be supported by adequate investments that will focus on increasing the productivity and welfare of both our farmers and fisherfolk. As a final point and challenge, in an opinion article I wrote for the Inquirer last January, I mentioned that what is perhaps the most critical test for this administration in terms of continuing on the gains and sustaining the gains that have been achieved is the choice of the presidential candidate who will continue the good governance and development agenda, who will enjoy the endorsement of what I still believe is a respected and popular president, and who will have the support of the administration's political party and machinery. That challenge remains and is something that cannot be taken lightly. We have already had a previous experience where an incumbent president was unable to gather a consensus among his allies for a winnable and worthy successor, and the result was ultimately more than a decade of lost opportunities for our country. We must not let this come to pass again. I am sure that everyone in this room wants the Philippines to break away from our tendency to take 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward. And that effort to unchain ourselves from that trend must start right now. Ladies and gentlemen, these are just a few of the unfinished priorities that the business community believes will greatly assist us in our shared goal of inclusive growth through job generation, poverty reduction, and global competitiveness. The country is facing a great test brought about by the Mama Sapano incident. Nevertheless, this brings with it a choice that we must collectively make as a nation, to unite and work together towards our common aspiration of a progressive Philippines, with peace reigning in the conflict areas in the South, with institutions that are strong and politically mature, and with an inclusive economy that gives every Filipino a fair shot at improving his or her lot in life. 4 Arangkada Forums have already been held. It will definitely be a shame if we enter the 5th Arangkada Forum and a large number of these recommendations, which have garnered the consensus of almost all the major business groups in the country, remain unimplemented. The time to vigorously pursue these reforms is now. And we in the Philippine business groups and joint foreign chambers are ready and willing to work more closely with government during the endgame phase of this administration. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning. And once again, mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you, Mr. Del Rosario. May we call on stage again Mr. Forbes to introduce our next speaker.
I want to particularly thank Ramon de Rosario for a great, really great and inspiring opening speech. Thank you, Ramon. And next, my good friend, Bill Luce, who is the co-chairman of the National Competitiveness Council and, you won't believe this, also the COO of the APEC Summit. I don't know how he does it, but in the past he was executive director of the Makati Business Club for 20 years and NAMFREL, and then he was with the Ayala Foundation and Ayala Museum, and now with the National Competitiveness Council, and he will talk about how the Philippines can move into the top third of global rankings. Bill, please join us.
National Treasurer Bobby Tan, President Director General Lilia de Lima, Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, friends in the Philippine business groups and the joint foreign chambers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the joint foreign chambers for inviting me once again to speak at the Arangkada. I think this will be my 4th year to deliver, I guess, the state of competitiveness here at the Arangkada Forum, so I hope to give you a little bit of good news at least. Okay, so here goes. First, let's start with our global report card. Like John in the Arangkada report, we track very closely the competitiveness indicators for the country. We track 12 of them. And I think if you take a look at just the last 2 years, you will see that there have been improvements on most, though not all, of the competitiveness rankings. The other important trend here, I think, to look at is that within ASEAN, we are beginning to move up into the middle portion of ASEAN, where we used to be in the bottom, near the bottom, usually 2nd or 3rd from bottom. Now we're about in the middle point. As John